would kind of call them up on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Absolutely. I'll bring Junaid in as well. 81869 if you want to text in and have your say on this one. I want to hear about the conversations you've had at the dinner table, or maybe you've had a situation where you've had to educate somebody. How did you do it? What was your approach as well? Because that can be the difficult thing for all of us. What's the right method when it comes to approaching difficult subjects and educating elders? 07920 500 200 if you've had some uncomfortable conversations with an auntie, with an uncle. I mean, get in touch, let us know. Junaid, morning.
Morning. How are you doing?
I'm cool, man. How about yourself? Have you been in a situation where you had to challenge someone's outdated or offensive language in your family or your community?
Yeah, I don't think anybody would be in a situation where they haven't heard this. And also, it's a very common sort of issue within our community. But wider to that, I would say it's not actually like an issue only specifically to do with our community. I think it's obviously something to do with the older generation. The fact that we're saying that it's people who are older than us, because if it's for people for our own generation or perhaps our parents, obviously we would come out and say something. And for the elder generation, I think perhaps there is a little bit of that hesitation. But personally, I don't actually think that they shy away from that conversation. So the previous contributor was saying about how they might have that conversation quietly to the side, but personally, I actually think it's actually okay to have that conversation within the room without making it into something that they're embarrassed by. I mean, if there's, 6, 7 of you sitting there, you're in your colours, your popos, your mammals, whatever else, and they do use a word like that, everyone's aware that a negative word was used. If you just simply say to the room that, you know what, that's an outdated term, you shouldn't say it, because nothing's ever said to the older generation, it's just kind of understood the fact that you are directing that response towards them. And I think the conversation kind of takes place naturally within the room that, okay, are we supposed to use this or are we not supposed to use this word? And I think you actually end up into a quite natural sort of conversation in terms of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. And I think that's the way to kind of do it, because you shouldn't really have to be shy about these things.
What was their reaction when you did that?
And I think straight away, everything, as with literally everything you could possibly be talking about in that group of like 8 or 10 or 15, 20 people, is that it turns into a joke straight away of, oh, no, we should or we shouldn't. But it very quickly turns into a conversation of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. I mean, for the time that it happened within our household, it was to do with like caste and basically, it's not to do with caste, it's to do with the fact of mixed race people and the outdated term of referring to somebody who's mixed race as half caste. And that discussion kind of took place in terms of the fact that, it's not meant to be that, it's meant to be, mixed race. And then we had a whole conversation about what are all the other terms, which is probably not a conversation you should be going through, basically just naming all the offensive sort of terms you should be saying about these things, right? But you at least have that open conversation. It takes place for about 10 minutes. After that, everybody's on the same page as to what the term should be, which obviously is mixed race.
Nimai, I'll bring you in just a second, but Amandeep, I wanted you to respond to Junaid, because obviously he uses a different approach to what you would do.
Yeah, I think that sometimes, I don't know, it's difficult, because I think that sometimes these things go past just one word. I know that the situation that we're talking about is Matt Damon was brought up on one specific word, and I know that there was kind of a wider conversation had around that. But I do think that generally it's not, like when we're talking about homophobia, when we're talking about racism, it's not just one word that's kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll never use that word again, and all my deep-rooted misogyny and homophobia and racism is gone because now I'm not going to use that one word. I think that for me personally, maybe it's just because my conversations always turn into, with family and friends, kind of always do turn into kind of these really like lengthy debates, that I personally just wouldn't be able to have that conversation in a group setting, because, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but my family can get very loud. And it's kind of just like turns into a shouting competition of who's going to be heard, who can shout the loudest. And I think that personally and this is kind of also, it's a personal thing, isn't it? I personally just prefer to have these conversations one-on-one, because I think that generally when they're had kind of in a group setting, although that can work sometimes, you will have you'll have someone who kind of maybe takes a back seat and doesn't necessarily say as much because they don't agree, but they don't see any point in bringing it up in a group conversation. But it's personal. It's completely personal.
Junaid, just respond there briefly, and then I'll bring Nimai straight in. I
mean, I think it's obviously not I don't know if I'm in these obviously a specific situation, but I think for myself being a very sort of loud advocate for equalities work within my work, and also my family also being exceptionally loud, I think it's just indicative of obviously our communities, our families and things like that. I think that it's the way in which we approach saying these things is the fact that I can argue with like literally any cousin or any uncle or auntie or any elder person, but I think it's in terms of the approach that we're doing it, that the conversation should be in a way that you approach it seriously, that it doesn't turn into a debate and it doesn't turn into a back and forth or a loud sort of discussion. It's more of a matter of fact, this is just correct and incorrect sort of thing, and it's just kind of a quick point of the conversation and moves quickly onwards. You don't need to really dwell on the point too much, but also we all have different families, we all have different approaches, and whatever works for each of us is obviously to get the message across, which is important.
Interesting. Okay, so we've had some messages on social media. Miss S says the conversations may be uncomfortable. We can't be bystanders to hatred and discrimination. Raj on Facebook said, wrong question. Elders should be replaced by anyone and everyone should do it, which is a similar point to what Junaid was talking about, in the sense that, you know, there might be people of our generation who will use outdated language as well. We need to call them out on it as well. Renu says, yes, I will, as I have responsibility towards a younger generation to learn from us. They need to learn to challenge elders or anyone who says something outdated, offensive, racist, or anything that doesn't have a place in the society today. I respect and love them, so it's my duty to correct them too. Jay says they did exactly the same when they were our age. Rani says, what happened to freedom of speech? And what about all those comedians who made a living off jokes using this language? Are we going to wipe them off the internet as well? I'll read a few more out in just a second. Nimai, thanks so much for waiting patiently. Morning.
Morning. How you doing?
Yeah, good, thank you, man. How about yourself then in this situation? Have you ever had a situation where you've had somebody in your family and they've used outdated or offensive language? They could be an elder person, but, you know, like Raj said, they could be someone who's from a younger generation as well who may have. And how did you approach that?
Yeah, of course. I've been in that kind of situation multiple times. And the best way I've kind of found out that I dealt with it was to kind of go both ways, is to also take them to the side there, kind of explain it a bit more of a calm setting. And sometimes it's appropriate to kind of call them out publicly as well, you know. Well, not publicly, but around the dinner table, around the family setting. I think it's both important to kind of educate your family members, your friends on these different situations. And I think I mentioned a comment about cancel culture, about people making a living from making these sorts of jokes. I mean, that was valid maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, but we're not 10, 15, 20 years ago anymore. We should know better at this point. Those jokes aren't acceptable. Those comments aren't acceptable nowadays, especially if they're at the detriment of various different groups, whether they're, racist comments, homophobic comments, bigotry comments. None of these sorts of things are acceptable. And I think this whole perception of respecting your elders, where it is valid and it is quite big in our community, I think we've got to draw a line somewhere where, you know, if we really did respect our elders, would make the effort to educate them and help better understand them, and to get a better root of understanding of where they're coming from as well. So it's not just like it's all from our point of view, trying to educate what's right and what's wrong, better understand where they're coming through, understand why they're saying these sorts of things, and trying to counteract that sort of thing, trying to have an open discussion with them instead of just lecturing them. And I think that's the best way we can educate our elders, especially, you know, who've been around decades longer than we have. You know, they've made their bones in their society, in their kind of family, and their communities, and we're just kind of coming up.
Yeah.
So how do we get our foot in the door there?
Yeah. Sorry,
Yeah.
Amandeep, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I completely agree with that. And I've never thought about it that way before, in terms of kind of, if we respect them, then we'd educate them on stuff as well. And just kind of, I mean, you know, again, just speaking from personal experience, all the conversations that I've had with, I feel like when we say elders, I don't know about you guys, but I automatically think of my grandparents. And I forget that obviously my elders are also my parents and my aunts and my uncles, and kind of bringing that aspect into it as well. You almost kind of expect your parents to be on the same level as you with these kind of things, because, you know, I mean, for example, like my mum's a teacher. She teaches year 6. So I'm like, oh yeah, you know, mum knows. Mum will know what's okay to say and what's not okay to say. And I've been in a situation before where she said something and she kind of looks at me because she knows that it's wrong. But to me, that's progress. kind of 10 years ago, maybe she would have said something and not batted an eyelid. And now she kind of looks at me and she'll say to me, is that okay? Can I say that? And I think just exactly to kind of build on what you were saying, that respect thing it's now two-way. And that, I think it just kind of, it opens everything up for a bigger conversation.
Are we too intolerant of, tolerance as well? Because at the same time, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you can be too tolerant of intolerance because you may just think that it's better to be quiet and not offend anybody or not have anything too awkward around the dinner table. So is that okay? Because we talked about leniency before, didn't we? We touched upon that, but how do we approach it if that's the situation which has been set in the family sort of grounds for decades?
I think tolerance. Sorry,
No, go in, jump in.
No, go ahead.
I think tolerance is a very important thing to a certain degree. To a point where everyone does have their own opinions, but it gets to a point where those opinions and those thoughts and those feelings and those actions have detrimental effects on other people as well. Like, you never know, like, if a child in the family or someone in the family is not ready to come out yet, they identify themselves as non-binary or something like that, and then you've got other family members, making jokes of them, kind of putting that negative perception around that identification. Is that family member going to feel comfortable? And should that family member still kind of be a part of that, system? And I think that level of tolerance, you've got to be a point where you can say, no, I don't tolerate this intolerance anymore, where you have to kind of fight it and kind of, stick up for yourself and stick up for the people that you represent.
Yeah, it's interesting because the tone can change it, and depending on someone using their native language as well, I guess that could be another part of it as well.
But I think language is a very important thing, especially with the older generation. They're a little bit more conservative.
Yeah, Junaid, did you want to come in there as well?
Yeah, I think I was just kind of coming off of what Nimai was saying there in terms of I think something that's important for our generation to remember is that, any of the generations above us, they're not sitting on Twitter all day long, so they don't understand the nuances of this argument to, the nth degree. They don't know crossing all the T's and what's new and what's in now in terms of a lot of these discussions. I mean, we've been exposed to all of this because we're very interconnected with one another, and we've had these conversations and we have them every single day. But you're talking about the specific example of what happened with, for example, Matt Damon. I mean, I think it's obviously not an excuse for Matt Damon considering the role that he has within society and how much he interacts with, obviously, the sort of cultural sort of environment that he works in. Obviously, within the movie industry, he should have known better. He should know better. You're comparing that towards, somebody who may have came to this country, 30, 40 years ago, spoken a different language, learned a new language, doesn't interact with society in the way that, with perhaps the wider LGBT community or the wider sort of ethnic minority communities or just society as a whole. So obviously they're going through a learning process, and it's not okay for us to use that as an excuse, but within periods when they should learn that something is wrong, they should be told it, and you should express it in a way that people should learn these things, as opposed to just being told off. Because if we're trying to create a more egalitarian or tolerant society, we should be promoting these messages through a way in which people will learn, not of just cancelling people or just trying to, make them feel bad about themselves as well. So if they're refusing to learn, then obviously they should feel bad. But I mean, for those that don't know any better, they should be corrected in a way that's, supportive of their journey.
I've got a message which is directed at all three of you, actually. I'll get Amandeep to answer it first, and I'll get Junaid and Nimai to jump in as well. This text on 81869 says, do your callers call their friends out when they make derogatory comments or say stuff they're not meant to? So friends sometimes say a lot worse things than family, but from my experience, they're hardly ever called out. And that one's from Han.
Yes, it's really hard. I think really weirdly...
Why is it hard? Why is that hard?
Out your friend is so much harder than calling out your family, because with your family there's just that kind of whole, at the end of the day, if you say something or whatever, they're still going to be there, they're still going to love you, they're going to understand you because they've known you for your whole life. I think with friends it's a lot harder because everyone kind of well, I suppose with friends it's harder because you'd expect them to think the same way as you, especially if you've been brought up in similar situations. You know, a good point was really just made about the fact that we have all this information at our fingertips. Like, if I know something, I would like to assume that somebody else knows the same thing. And yeah, we all have different experiences and we're all kind of educating each other on that, and I understand it. But I've been in a situation before where one of my really close friends said something very, very offensive, and I called her out on it, and she accused me of calling her racist. And it's just, I think that kind of jumping the gun, and, you know, sometimes you're kind of like, oh, is this conversation worth it? Is this person still going to be my friend afterwards? And I think that if anything, you have to be able to look past that and just be like, well, if they're going to be like that, do I want them to be my friend?
Yeah, Nimai?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think it is a lot harder to set those boundaries with friends other than family. I've also been recently involved in a situation with my very closest friends who kind of gaslight me when I kind of called them out on it. And that friendship ended. And you kind of have to do that, I think. You've got to set those boundaries for yourself.
What did you call them out on? What were they saying without obviously repeating anything?
Yeah, I mean, long story short, I think there was a derogatory joke made, a racial derogatory joke that was made. I said I wasn't very comfortable with that. And then there was kept on saying that I took it too far, that I didn't really understand racial prejudice and things like that. And, you know, at that point, I was like, I'm trying to explain this situation, and it just wasn't kind of getting through. And so at that point, I had to like step back and was like, this isn't worth it. You know, it's not worth my energy. It takes a lot of mental toll, especially with a friend. You know, your friends are the people you choose to be with, and it's the harder thing to do to kind of, you know, start like debating and arguing with a friend other than a family.
Yeah. Nimai, I just got to jump in because we've got to head to the news, but let's open this up as well. You challenge your elders if they use outdated offensive language. What about your friends? What about your WhatsApp groups as well? Get in touch. We're going to head over to Newsbeat, and Roisin Hasty will be back on the other side in 2 minutes.